Welcome to Office Hours by XXX Church. I'm your host, Carl Thomas, and with me is our producer and my good friend, Neil. How you doing today, Neil?
Doing great. How are you, Carl?
Hey, man, I can't complain. So for those of you who are listening or viewing for the first time, the idea behind Office Hours is to allow people a way to get answers to their specific questions about certain, let's just say, sensitive topics. In this case, our topics are going to vary, I'm sure, but in general, we'll be dealing with questions about porn addiction, masturbation, sexuality, and the like. Neil is going to be helping me by asking those questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them the best way I can. This is going to be informal, and I'm going to be giving my best advice or opinions, but hey, listen, I always reserve the right to be wrong, and you absolutely have the right to disagree. It's all good. Understand, though, no questions are off the table, and I'm going to be honest and blunt with my answers, so please don't get your feathers ruffled, folks. It's nothing personal. Does that make sense, Neil?
Yeah, it sure does.
Cool. Well, then, you know what? It's Friday. We all have a weekend to get to. Neil, what do you have for me today?
All right, number one, what do I do when my wife hardly ever wants to have sex with me? Between my raging sex drive and libido, the feeling of rejection also fuels the idea or the desire to masturbate. Not so much to lust, but really just to scratch that itch. It's such a strong itch, it's like when you're thirsty or you're hungry. What do you think about that, Carl?
Well, okay. First of all, coming right back to some of the stuff we talked about last week, so I would definitely recommend that this person check out last week's episode. But again, if your wife's not having sex with you, first place to start would be have that conversation with her. And if she doesn't want to have that conversation with you, then possibly seek out a counselor or somebody like that could sort of serve as a mediator so you can walk through these things, because maybe you're approaching the conversation wrong or you're not asking questions in the right way. Maybe she's on the defensive. What he didn't say here, I don't think, was whether or not he's currently looking at porn or masturbating. He just said, hey, my wife's not having sex with me, and so because of my quote-unquote raging sex drive, I feel the need to go masturbate. That's correct. Isn't that pretty much what he said?
That's right, to scratch that itch.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and again, I could be wrong, but I'm going to assume that, sir, whoever asked this question, you probably do look at porn or masturbate, right? And so you're saying, hey, how do I stop? Or is it okay? You're looking either for permission or advice on how to stop because of your, again, raging sex drive. The topic of hypersexuality is a complex one. I'm not going to try to break it all down here. But I will tell you this, okay? I can speak from personal experience and also from dealing with a lot of people I know who have dealt with stuff like this. One of the common things you hear from a guy who regularly looks at porn or masturbates is that he has a raging sex drive. I know I used to say that. Oh man, I just have this really high revving sex drive. And the reality is that it's not that you have this genetic predisposition to wanting sex. It's that your brain has become over the years conditioned to want sex in certain situations. Specifically situations, I would say, where you're either feeling anxiety or some sort of angst, or maybe you're lonely or feeling, run the gamut of negative emotions that we can experience throughout the day. These things trigger a response in us to want to satisfy our brain's need to get back to normal, to get healthy. And so our brain points us in a direction of the things that it knows will make it feel the best, quickest. Beyond that, there's also the idea of, hey, if you're regularly looking at this stuff and you have no real, let's just use the word sobriety in between these periods of time, your brain's going to be running at an artificially high level of dopamine. So it's used to getting that big hit every time you orgasm. It's getting used to, like, okay, hey, I want to live up here, but baseline is here, right? And so it feels like a big dip for you, a big crash, but it's not really. You're just at an artificially high level, and you need to come back down here. And so I'll wrap it up this way. In my life, I can tell you when I was dealing with this stuff, I would want to look at porn or have sex or masturbate on the daily basis. There were some days where I would look at porn and masturbate multiple times a day. Now, admittedly, I was younger. Scientifically speaking, yes, my sex drive was a little higher then. But I'm not talking about 20, 30 years ago. I'm talking about 10, 11 years ago, right? And now, with 10 or 11 years of sobriety and freedom behind me, like that's not the case. I don't get up every day thinking about, hey, how can I have an orgasm today? In fact, it's quite the opposite. Sometimes I purposely choose to, hey, I'd rather have sex tomorrow because I want to give my system enough time to like rev up for it, right? Because if I had sex last night, today I'm still feeling pretty satisfied, sexually speaking. Back then, no. I could have had sex last night. By 6 in the morning, I still wanted sex. I still wanted an orgasm. Masturbate that morning. By 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I wanted another one. It was just ongoing. But that's because, I was running at these really high levels of dopamine, and my brain did not want to come back down. It liked where it was, and so I needed to maintain. So that's what I would say about that. If you want that to get better, sex with your wife, that's going to be counseling and talking it out and doing the hard work like we talked about last week. If you want the scratching the itch to get better, that's the recovery process, my man. That's getting to the point where you don't need this stuff all the time. And until you get off it, you're always going to feel like you have that raging libido or super high sex drive. That's about all
Absolutely.
I got.
Yeah, that was great. Normally I'm always the person saying, get the counseling. And I think that's important here. However, I think you're right. The healing aspect of getting past the itch, man, it reminds me of the neural pathways. You're building those neural pathways. I won't get into all that, but it wants to go down the path of least resistance every time you're triggered. So if that's your path of least resistance, guess what? It's always going to be scratch the itch. I think that definitely has to be addressed in the recovery process.
Yeah, and the last point on that is just a lot of guys that I've dealt with who are either never been down the recovery road or just starting. A lot of them don't even realize they're being triggered. And this is something we talked about just a couple months ago in the Live Free community with Dr. Stephen Luff. Sometimes we don't even know we're being triggered. So that's why it comes across as, oh, I just feel horny or I just have a high sex drive. And the reality is things were happening all throughout the day, possibly, that was pushing you down that road, and you're just not even cognizant. You're not even cognizant of that fact, right? So again, you might be listening to me telling you this and saying, that's bullcrap. I'm not dealing with stress or pain. I'm just horny. Trust me, man. There's something below that. You probably just don't realize it because you're operating again in this cloud. So what's the next question, my friend?
All right, next question, number 2. I usually see advice on how parents should address porn and or sex to their children. How come there isn't much advice on how to address the topic of masturbation to children? How do we address the sin of masturbation to children? Is it because porn is much worse and more of a problem than masturbation? Okay,
so we talked about this again last week a little bit, and I shared, I'm not going to reshare it so you can check out last week's episode, but I shared the story of how I talked to my son about masturbation. What I would say here is when you're dealing with a young mind, I don't even know if I would say porn and masturbation, one is that much worse than the other in terms of how you talk to your kids about it. Here's just, again, my opinion, and I know other guys that they deal a lot with, like my friend Jason from Project 619, we have these talks about stuff like this, and he agrees, I believe, that a lot of times we come into this conversation about porn and masturbation with our kids from this, it's wrong, it's dirty, it's sinful aspect. And what happens then is when your child stumbles upon it, right, they're not going to want to go to you to talk about it because you've already labeled it wrong and evil and all this other stuff, right? So is there a difference between porn and masturbation? Yes, I would say there is. But when you're talking to and again, there's a whole lot of caveats there, so don't run with that, guys. But when you're talking to a kid, like your son or your daughter, I would approach it personally relatively the same way. Hey, guys, listen, this is what sex looks like. This is the purpose of sex. You're going to run into these things, right? You're going to run into porn. You're going to hear about or possibly want to explore the idea of masturbation. It's natural. It's curiosity in some parts, and in some parts it's just the product of living in a world where this stuff exists everywhere, and your friend's going to inevitably introduce you to it. I guarantee it, right? I don't walk around thinking to myself, oh gosh, I hope my son doesn't look at porn. I know he's going to see porn at some point. I rather think, hey, I hope I've prepared him well enough so when he does look at porn, he A, knows what to do, and if he doesn't, B, he feels free enough to talk to me about it so we can process this thing out. And even, like I said last week about my masturbation talk with Hunter, that's my son's name, I told him, hey, buddy, if you decide to masturbate, if you choose to go down this road, all I ask is that you tell me so we can talk it out. And I tell him the same thing with porn. If you see porn, I don't want you to feel bad or dirty or guilty. I just want you to talk to me about it. And let's walk this thing out. And from what he said, my son, he's not a poker player. He wears his emotions on his face. He's a terrible liar. I'm fairly confident that when that situation comes up, he will come to me and talk about it because I've set the table that, hey, these things aren't helpful. And that's how I word it. Hey, this isn't healthy. This isn't helpful. This isn't going to be good for you. I stay away from the evil and sinful. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I stay away from that because at his age, it's going to be more about, hey, this thing popped up and I figured I'd check it out. Not, oh, this thing popped up and I know God doesn't like it, but I still did it, right? Like I just know at that age, that's what it's going to be more about. So I approach him in that respect. It's not helpful. It's not healthy, buddy. Even when it came to when my kids were younger, we were talking about language, right? I stay away from words, and I even would correct my kids when they would use the language of, oh, they said a bad word. I say, no, listen, man. Language is language. They said an inappropriate word, possibly, or a hurtful word, or something like that. But let's not call it good and bad, okay? Because once you hear, well, this kid said a bad word, now you start thinking, well, he must be a bad kid. Maybe he doesn't know any better. Maybe he lives in a home where that language gets thrown around every day, and that's just part of his normal life. It's an inappropriate word, Hunter, right? You shouldn't say that, especially at your age, right? It's a hurtful word. So I would say with porn and masturbation, same thing.
Absolutely. Dead on. You know, you did such a great job, Carl, of putting that out there about addressing it to your kids at a young age. But the biggest point is you develop trust with him. Trust to come back to you and trust to say, I did this, I saw this happened. And that's a matter of showing them love, unconditional love and trust. So I think that's where that just ties in so well.
Yeah, and I would say one other thing on that is one of the best things you can do as a parent, I believe, is lead with transparency as well. Now, I'm not saying that you have a quote-unquote full disclosure with your child about every sexual mistake you made. But what I am saying is be a little transparent or be very transparent about that maybe you dealt with some of this stuff or you saw some of this stuff. Or, you know, I mean, when I had my masturbation chat with Hunter, I led with, hey, this is how I ended up doing it. This is what happened. And in my case, there wasn't any porn involved. It was simply, hey, I wonder what this thing can do. And then I found out. And then I went down that rose path, which is no good. You know, so I led with that. And so my son, he knows, like, oh my gosh, my dad is honest enough and free enough to actually talk about the really, in his opinion, embarrassing stuff that he did. I guess I could talk about my embarrassing stuff as well, right? So lead with transparency and you're going to get farther with your kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What we got next?
All right, next is number 3. Now, number 3 is a very long question, so I've kind of narrowed it down a little bit.
Good.
There's a 19-year-old that's really going through some suffering from some issues with lust since he was a very young kid, about 8 years old. But his question really revolves a little bit more around his dad and what's going on with his dad. So let's get to that. He's a 19-year-old, like I said, still struggles, but is actually finding progress in his freedom and his recovery. He has a dad who looks at porn, and he knows this, and it's obvious. He wants to know if and how he should approach his dad. And is porn sinful or not? Because that would help him figure out some of those things to discuss with his dad. And also, he wants to know about how to approach his dad. Pretty tough question.
Yeah. Thankfully, I actually have firsthand experience with this. So, out of respect, I'm not going to say what family member, but let's just say it was a very close family member. Similar situation. Now, in my case, I had been free of porn for a while, so it wasn't like I was still struggling. Now, he said he had struggled with it, but it sounded like he had found some victory in that area of his life. So,
correct.
To a degree, it sounds like it's semi in his past, and in my case, it was. It was several years, maybe, I'm trying to think, at that point, maybe it was 5-6 years in my past, right? But this particular family member, I knew that they were dealing with pornography issues. I also knew they were dealing with some other issues. And the way I found out was by accident. It was completely innocent, but it was one of these things where something happened, and I said, man, that doesn't sound right. And so, yes, I did a little digging because of the sensitive nature, I didn't want to just come at him and say, hey, I think you're doing this, right? And so I did a little digging. Sure enough, internet history was, guys, all you guys out there, listen, even when you clear your internet history, you think you're safe. Trust me, if you know what you're doing, you can always find the breadcrumbs. So,
Yep.
Back to the story. I was 1,000% certain this person was struggling with porn and sex. And so I talked to my pastor at the time and asked him. I said, hey, this guy is not going to take it very well. I'm pretty sure he's going to deflect or deny. I want to approach him with love. How do I do this? Or do I do it at all? Do I just... And he said, well, do you love that person? I said, yeah, I do. They're a very close family member. And he said, well, I think it's then in your responsibility to approach them out of love, but that's the key, out of love. You need to approach them out of love, not, hey, you're doing a bad thing, but hey, I love you and I see you're doing a thing that's not helping you. And this was key. He said to me, what I would do, Carl, since I know your story as well, is I would lead with that. Lead with, hey, listen, I want to tell you something. Okay. This is something I went through in my life. And then lead into, and I think it's something you may be struggling with as well, and I want to help you with this. So I took his advice. It did not turn out well.
No.
But I don't think it's because the advice was bad. I think the advice was amazing. It didn't turn out well because the other person just didn't want to hear it and just kept denying, and still denies to this day. Thinks I'm crazy and smoking crack. I don't know, but it was great advice, and I would do it the same exact way all over again. Not because the results were good, because they weren't, but because I was able to walk away, and this is going to sound, I guess, a little selfish, but I was able to walk away feeling 100% solid on what I chose to do. There was no question, right? I did not leave that person and ignore him. I was not apathetic. I didn't pretend that it wasn't an issue, that I knew it was an issue that was crushing him. Like, I did the responsible thing. I approached him with love. I led with my own sins, if you will. And then I offered help, and they refused it. It is what it is. But at least I can, to some degree, I can wash my hands of it and say, hey, I did my best. And now I just leave the door open. Hey, if you ever want to talk about this, I'm still here. I recognize that this is not an issue with you, supposedly, but if you ever want to own it, I'm always here to talk to you about it and help you through, because you know I've been down that road too. One funny thing is when I went to that person, I opened up about my life. They were very gracious about it. And one thing they asked was, well, why are you sharing this with me? And that was the entranceway to
The
say,
opening.
well, funny thing. Funny you asked. So I would say the same thing. Like, yes, you're a young guy, but you have some authority, if you will, in this area because you've gone through it. You have some success, and I would say this would apply whether you have success or not, but you've had some success in this area. That's a help. You can speak firsthand to how this stuff has kind of damaged your life and impacted you, and you love your dad. So I would say, yeah, you do the right thing. You approach him with love, and you just, if he doesn't want to hear it or he reacts negatively, give him the grace and say, okay, Dad, I just wanted to make it clear that I see this happening. I think it's happening. I want to be here for you. But if you're not willing to go down that road, I still love you. I'm still always going to be here for you. And we don't need to talk about this every day. But I want to throw this out there right now because as your son who loves you, I think that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. That's phenomenal. Great answer.
Well,
love goes both ways.
I can't take credit for it. A pastor gave me the answer, but it was great. It was great advice, I think.
True, but you did
I believe. And I would do the same thing again, all over again, even though the results weren't what I had hoped. But
Sure.
you can't
Absolutely.
do anything about the results. You can only do what you can do. So
That's right. That's right. All right, let's move on. Number 4. This is a fast one, or a quick one. Quick question. What is the incubus spirit, and does it contribute to homosexuality in men? So perhaps it's not an easy question, but it was a fast one.
well, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Incubus spirit. I actually Googled that because I saw that question kind of come in, but I didn't really spend too much time on it. It has to do with demons and whatever. Listen, first of all, just so you know, Triple H Church, we're not a gay straight ministry. It has nothing to do with that. We're here to help people with issues of sexuality and brokenness. And let's just say, feel free to define that however you want. Okay. But what contributes to homosexuality? Like, my gosh, there's a ton of differing opinions out there. I don't know if any of them are 100% correct. And there are some really horrible opinions out there on it. Unfortunately, a lot of it is coming from the Christian world, like just almost borderline hateful opinions on it. I will include a link below in the comments, but there's a great video that I would recommend anyone watch. It's a message. I can't remember the guy's name, but you'll see it in the video. It's a message he gave at a church, specifically dealing with men, not women. He said with women, it's a totally different situation. But he specifically broke down how same-sex attraction is formed in a young man. It was amazing. It was something I wish I would have heard before, just in dealing with my children, because so much of it has to do with how you raise your kids. And the guy that turned me on to it is a guy that deals with same-sex attraction. He said, "Yeah, this is spot on in terms of my experience, my life experiences." And the guy that gave the message, I believe, is a clinician who practices somewhere out in Colorado, I want to say. But he is a guy who was coming from first-hand knowledge. Like this was his life. He was sexually abused. He had same-sex attraction. He was actually fully engaged in the homosexual lifestyle, had same-sex attraction. And so he knows what he's talking about. I believe it was really eye-opening. And the other thing about it that was so great is that it just allowed for so much more empathy for that I don't want to say that side of things because I don't that sounds terrible. But you know what I'm saying? Like it created more empathy in you. So wow, I never knew that. Like that's crazy, you know? And so it's great. I would watch it. It's like 45 minutes long, I believe. It's worth every minute of viewing. But I'll include that link below. And that's about all I have to say on that topic.
Yeah. It's a rough topic. I know coming from me, I was a group leader for same-sex attraction guys. And I knew nothing about it, but I jumped in and wanted to help out with this group. And to see all the different guys in the group that had all different scenarios and opinions on how they came to that lifestyle, how that lifestyle developed within them. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a million different things. And I would definitely watch the video.
Yeah, it's good. It's a great video. So,
yeah. All right. Last but not least, number 5, we have a 67-year-old. His wife never wants to have sex with him, hardly ever, since at least 10 years ago. I'm sorry, he said 10 months ago. He's talking months in between. Then it's usually in the dark and I don't get to see her. Yes, she's put on some weight, but at this point I don't mind if we can only have sex more often. So he developed a habit of looking and watching younger women and occasionally the use of porn, masturbation quite often. He doesn't like to do it. He knows he needs to stop looking at other women, looking at porn and masturbating. He says that sexualization is everywhere. How can I deal with it? Please offer some help.
Wow. Okay. A lot of facets here. I'm not going to address every one of them, but first of all, again, if you haven't had sex in 10 months, first thing, have a conversation about that and try to find out why. And again, you need to approach that conversation open-hearted and say, hey, what am I doing? Is there something I'm doing that's contributing to this? Where are you at emotionally with this? Talked about the book last week, The Great Sex Rescue. Check that out. It's meant for women, but a lot of guys buy it because it gives kind of a woman's side to things and explains how, hey, a lot of women should not be down for one-sided sex, but a lot of women are told they need to be. And so in order to comply with social pressure, they enter into these situations as a somewhat unwilling participant. And of course they don't enjoy it. Of course they don't enjoy it because they don't even want to be there in the first place. So that's that. Now, the rest of it, no offense, but dude, oh my gosh. I want to, because my wife's not having sex with me, I'm looking at younger girl porn. Okay. Terrible excuse. That's exactly what it is. It's an excuse. It's not a reason. It's an excuse. Oh, my wife's not giving me sex, so I can go look at porn. No, you can't. Okay. The two aren't connected. Stop it. Second of all, if you're looking at younger girl porn, and especially if your wife knows about it, and I would tell you, like I tell a lot of guys, even if she hasn't specifically said she knows about it, she probably has an idea that something's not right. My wife tells me it all the time. Hey, before you told me you were looking at porn, I thought you were doing something. In fact, she assumed that I was having an affair. It was actually worse than the reality of the situation to some extent, right? So, yeah, you're looking at porn, especially of younger women. She's an older woman. You're looking at younger bodies. Like, of course she's going to say, well, I don't know if I want to have the lights on. And of course she's going to feel shameful about her body because you're helping her feel shameful about her body. You're saying, hey, your body's not good enough. I'm going to go look at young girls, right? You're not looking at 67-year-old porn either, right? Not that that would be any better, but come on, man, you're not helping the situation. So how can you then turn around and say, well, I can't believe she's doing this to me. Dude, you're doing it to yourself by allowing this behavior to happen within your marriage and then giving yourself the pass for doing so. Are you kidding me? No, there is no excuse for this, okay? And if you think there is, then you need to talk to some people because there isn't, all right? You want to have more intimacy, better sex, more sex with your wife, you need to have the conversation. You need to work on the intimacy stuff. You need to do all these things. And, dude, you need to stop looking at porn and masturbating, period. Now, again, I understand, easier said than done, especially if you've been doing this most of your life. I get that. I'm not trying to be one of those pastors that just say, hey, that's bad, stop it. What I'm saying is, hey, that's not helpful. That's hurting your marriage. You should know better. You do need to stop it. But I also understand that it's not just something you turn off right away, and that's why we have recovery programs, right? That's why we have like the Course X3 Pure, or we have small groups online, or we have the Live Free Community app. And it's not just our resources. There's plenty of resources out there. That's why there's counseling, right? You got to engage in these things so you can get help, so you can get to the point where you're not going to need this stuff. And it's going to stop polluting your marriage, which is what it's doing right now. It's polluting your marriage. So you're pouring gasoline and all sorts of chemicals in the pond. Don't complain when the water doesn't taste right. Yeah.
Great answer.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. You know, I won't even talk about the last part of the question, the younger women and all that. That's totally out of my league right now. I would also recommend one more book. It's called How We Love by Milan Jurkovic. This was given to me by a good friend of mine. And if you want to know more about how your wife listens and learns and how to communicate with her, because that seems like a big topic in this question, is getting some communication going on with your wife. Check this book out too. It'll help you understand that and help you understand how your life and the things that you do affect her.
Yeah.
In the long run. So I would highly recommend that too.
Yeah, I'll include a link to that. We'll include a link to that below. It's that's a great book. I read it. That's a great book.
Yeah, it's tremendous. It helped me communicate with my wife in ways that I didn't know I should be doing. Just didn't know about it. But
and sir,
it's
by
phenomenal.
the way, if you're listening, the person that asked this question, understand. I know it sounds like I'm coming down hard. It's not meant to be shameful. I'm not saying, oh, you're a bad person. I'm approaching you the way I would a friend. Hey, dude, you know better. Come on. Step up and do what you need to do. Okay, this is not helping you. Like I'm trying to challenge you out of love. I'm not condemning you. I get it. I've done a lot of bad crap myself. I wish I had someone there back then who would have told me, Carl, get your head in the game. What are you thinking? All right, but I didn't. Now, of course, that was my choice because I didn't seek out accountability either. But you know, I'm just trying to help you and say, hey, bro, you're coming at this all wrong, okay? Because I want to see you get it right? It's not shaming you, man. I get it, but that's why we have these resources that can help you hopefully get out of that sticky soup. So that's it, right, Neil?
Perfect. Yes, that's it. That's the last of the questions.
Good deal, man. Well, listen, hey,
All right.
Thank you very much, Neil, for your help there. And folks, I hope you enjoyed this.
Sure.
I hope some of the information we covered was helpful and informative. Hopefully we didn't piss off people too bad. And we'll see you next week with some new questions and answers. Have a great weekend, folks.